This video is going to be some raw footage of me drilling with a copper tube, and the abrasive is just sand, crushed sandstone. On the left we see the final result of the drill I'm going to show now. On the right we see a later core. I'm showing this because this was the third core that I had drilled, and I'd only just started to improve my technique, still a noob. I hadn't yet worked out that you need to regularly rotate your drill position to cancel out the inherent bias of whether it's a bow drill or a flywheel drill. There is a bias in there, and so basically I physically moved the stone, but if you were drilling on a large block you would just rotate regularly around your drilling position, and that cancels out the bias. So that's the final result, but there's an example of a later core where it's equal, and again it's tapered. So the one on the left looks straight, but it's angled on one side. Here we see the top view of the final result, and again that later core, just by rotating my drill position or rotating the stone, but by moving it around. So the one on the left, the one I'm going to show now, we see that the final result, it is elliptical at the top, as where the later core is circular. So there I've just highlighted it with some circles. So it's just an easy way to simple tricks, but you can create really good drill cores. Okay, here we see the final result of the drill core I'm about to show. I use crushed sandstone as an abrasive. It's the quartz that makes granite hard on most scale. It's the quartz in sandstone that makes sandstone hard. Granite and sandstone on most scale are exactly the same. It's the quartz in there, and the basic principle of most scale is that like cuts like. You don't need a harder abrasive, you just need the hardest of what you're drilling with to work with. So quartz, and I've just because the crushed sandstone, it's like very fine, it is not a very coarse grit, so this one does not leave deep grooves on the side. But just by rubbing some chalk over the top, you can see the striation patterns there. They cross over one another, and there are other features. I want to do a little in-depth video into all the different cores I've done, and how the striation patterns work out, and just go on to explain core 7, for example, that they're not always concentric, they cross over, they're at angles. That's just the nature of the beast. So let's just get into it, and here's a video, just raw footage. Okay, so I'm going to repeat this experiment for a few reasons. Just to this was the black granite. My first core, I didn't do it right, and so it ended up elliptical. But of course, we did find these shelves, these steps in here, which goes a long way to, impossible without lost high ancient technology. So, for instance, the abrasive. I'll come back to that, but I mentioned that in the last video. Important feature, probably, and the second core much more successful because first one, noob mistakes, and this again was in black granite and the striations. But an important feature is the tapering, and I'm going to predict that I'm going to get the same result again, because everyone else who actually does the experiments rather than claims to, wink wink Christopher Dunn, you're cotton on to you, mate. This tapering is impossible not to achieve by actually replicating the ancient method of doing it, as is depicted on ancient depictions on walls as well. So that'll be, again, I'll be using the same tool. Now, so instead of black granite, I'll be doing it on grey granite, and I won't be using any corundum this time. I'm just going to be using crushed sandstone. So I'm taking down the abrasive again, because this will be an important feature. Now, again, the tool is just a piece of, I've just used quickset cement. Now, as in the ancient pictures depicted in Egypt, they have something like this. They also sometimes show just bags tied to the roof, so bags of sand. It's just about getting a weight, and so you get the movement going around. I'm just using the same handle, and I can just insert it into the copper, and so I can cut my copper to the length that's appropriate, rather than find a new branch every single time. Yeah, so for instance, imagine this piece of wood was continuing on from there, so you only need a small piece of copper, a tube, or you could wrap
a copper sheet around. That's an important difference as well, because the tapering effect of using a tube such as this as opposed to a sheet wrapped around, we'll get to that as well. But so yeah, so you could just use wood, and you need a small piece of copper. Egyptians were great at casting copper, so you'll see in copper, gold, silver jewelry from ancient Egypt that the ability to create very delicate small tubes from casting was well within their capability. And whether it's copper, gold, silver, it's just not laying around on the floor in massive piles in Egypt. Gold, copper, silver was and still is money. So if you hear this argument, well, where are all the chisels, where are all the tools? That is a ridiculous statement, because where's all the, copper has value, and more so then as now, because it's, we have massive mines and the production capabilities that we have. But anyway, so let's just move. Okay, so there's the method. I could use, this on there. This is just for ease of, so I can adjust the length, etc. And I'll be using a piece of wood as a guide. So this guide hole, beginning it's difficult. So if I put it down and start, look, it's just going to be spinning loose. So one way is you could use a piece of flint to carve a small channel to begin the hole, or even easier and better is just to use a guide such as this. Now I'm using just some cheap ply. It'd be much better actually if I got some hardwood and created something with there, because yeah, this hole's not the tightest fit. But again, that's what we're still going to get is the tapering effect in there. So if you carve a channel, a little groove to begin the hole with, or if you do it like this, the same issue is going to be emerging in there. Which one's the better fit? Actually, maybe I should have used that one. Actually, I think that one's better. And what's that piece doing there? So I'm just on the bottom around the hole, I've just put this poster putty, plasticine, blue tack, whatever you want to use. That's just to hold the water and the abrasive in there, so there's a seal around there. The rest of it is just to stick it down. So instead of having a bigger plank and getting someone or piling on weights to keep it stable, this sticky stuff is going to hold it down well enough to keep it in place, and so I can carry on with that. So that's the basic method of it. And did I mention, yeah, I'm using sandstone, and now all I need now is some water, and that's the basics, that's the essential method of it and what we're going to achieve. And again, because if you actually do the experiment using these techniques rather than wink wink Christopher Dunn style onto you, you're going to get tapered cores all the time. This is not evidence of ancient lost high technology, and not to achieve, it's virtually impossible not to achieve this, because just by the whether it's a bow drill or this type of drill, the drill wants to wobble. That's just the nature of a beast. That's what's going to happen, and that's going to create a tapered drill, a tapered core. And so yeah, that's an important feature. And okay, grey granite this time. Now there are some, unlike the black granite which has smaller crystals, it's all, this particular granite has these you might see these lighter spots, so it has these larger patches of crystal. I might actually try and arrange it, so I'm going to try and get it there on a spot where we have that. So actually I'm going to go there, okay, and I'm going to try and, so there we have, can I get it, actually I want to get it here, and I'm going to try and I'm going to line that up on the edge. And so I'm going to try and cut into that section. Yes, that's much better. All right, so that's the basics of it. I'll still put my foot down, metaphorically and literally, in regards to this, and get that piece in there. So that's the intro, that's the basics of how it's done. We've already done it with the black copper, I'm going to do it with the, black granite, I'm going to do it with the grey granite as well. I'm going to get some rose granite, red granite it's sometimes called, and do with that as well. But as granite goes, that's quite hard. Grey granite's on the more easier to work side of the stones. So that's why tombstones, for instance, are usually made of grey granite. Aesthetics maybe, but it's also the easier to work with when it comes to these hard stones. So whether it's andesite, basalt, or they're all, slight variations in them, but if this works on one, it works on all the others. It might just add a few percentage points of difficulty to work, but if it works on one, it'll work on the others. They're all basically granitic stones in essence. And now let's get to it. So we've already put that seal there underneath. I'm just going to put some abrasive into the hole, and then I'll add some water to there. Again, to be unlike Lost Ancient High Technology of Egypt, Christopher Dunn, you should be lubricating it, as is the Penn State paper, which they cherry pick little bits out of. Okay, but anyway, we'll get to that and the analysis of the cotton. Before we go into that, let's just again replicate, do the work, do the experiments, and prove this beyond a shadow of a doubt. And once we do that, we can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt the deception, the trickery that's going on the big hitters amongst Lost Ancient High Technology. Okay, so I like my sit-down version of this particular drill. As we mentioned, I'm going to be not even using corundum, just to further prove a point. I'm just going to be using a sandstone abrasive mix, not even emery grade, less than emery. And we just need to add some water to there. So I'll be drilling there again on that. Have I got it across that crystal? Yep. And just add a small amount of abrasive to begin with. Water or oil as a lubricant, as has been proven by that Penn State study, which is actually used by the charlatans. But okay, place it in there. So whether it's a bow drill or this type of drill, you're always going to get this wobbling. That's just going to happen, and anyone who doesn't didn't do the experiment. And again, I'm just going to keep it down there with my feet. So handle is off center, copper tube, and the weight, I'm going to begin just by spinning it, and then you get the motion in there. If you spend a couple of minutes, whether it's a bow drill or this type of drill, you're not really going to get across the technique. Wink wink, Christopher Dunn. But let's keep going at it. And so I'll be filming this one, and I'll be so within a few minutes I will have already created a groove, and I'll be trying to film more, because now, having developed the technique a little bit more, I want to have a look and the timing, what's per hour, what's the rate that you can achieve. Unlike this can be a bit tiring, so if you had it for a few minutes, like 10-15 minutes, it can be a bit tiring. Again, from my first experiments, it was very tiring to begin with, and I learned to do it better, and a lot of that energy was wasted, so you can go a little bit further and be a little bit more energy efficient and not get exhausted as quickly. And if you have a couple of people doing it, 5 minutes on, 5 minutes off, move back and forth, you could be constantly running at it. But anyway, spin it, and then we'll get it. And also my technique's a little bit better, so I'm not, originally my hand was full of blisters. Now I can do it without a rag or a glove and keep going for a while without getting the blisters. this will wobble all the time, you can't get around it, and that will create the tapering. And yeah, so we'll come to that again later, because the dishonesty by certain people, and this is just the fact of physics, the handle is off center, it's going to wobble. If you don't get a wobble, you didn't do it. Need to add some more water. The dry abrasive sort of soaks it up, and then it will be soaked into the wood a little bit. And just mix that up a bit. More abrasive. Just out of curiosity, because this was just see if I can feel with a stick. Okay, I can feel that there is a beginning of a groove there. Very, very delicate. Yeah. just going to check and mix up because the abrasive tends to gather up in the centre. Just a touch more just to keep it up. Now, even though the abrasive gets ground down into dust, it's still an abrasive, so that's important thing. So yeah, definitely beginnings of a groove in there. Just a dab, literally a pinch of abrasive. Okay, look, if you're new to this, that might look easy, but it took me a few hours of practice and some previous ones to keep the spinning going, and also to do it in a way where you're not really having to sort of thrust around and get exhausted very, very quickly. So once you get better and better, it's only really a very gentle movement, very small amount of energy, effort goes into going once you start spinning, you only really have to keep the momentum going. You don't have to put a lot of energy in there, but that's the thing that comes with practice and experience at this. It's also a matter of trying to reduce the wobble as much as possible and to keep it as straight as, or vertical as is able as well. So that's again one of the things you sort of just need to develop with a bit of practice and experience. And I'm still a total noob at this, mind you. But just again with a small amount of experience, you do a few experiments with granite in different forms, whether it's grinding, cutting, or drilling. You only really need a small amount, like a few hours here, a few hours there, and you go from like thinking this is impossible to, oh yeah, this can be done, and then, oh yeah, I'm getting much better, and it's actually much quicker than what you would expect. At the very least, much quicker than what the experts in lost ancient high technology stonework would have you believe, who would also say that, for instance, that this is impossible, Brian Foster being one of them. Just mix up that abrasive that's getting trapped in the centre, and a touch more water. It is a messy thing, especially once you add the water. It's going to get flung around a bit. Living here on my own, I've got no one to upset, so I can get away with this. But again, if you find a clean space to do it, so if you live and share in the house with someone, so it doesn't bother them. Smooth to me. I'm just going to add, again, just a pinch of abrasive at a time. I don't want too much in there because I don't want it to build up and grind the side of the wood, etc. too much, but yeah, just a pinch at a time. Got to get it around on the edges, and you'll hear the sound of it, that gritty sound, because I want maximum abrasion. That's right. You might even just by rolling it around, you can hear that crunching sound. Sometimes like the momentum of the drill will get ahead of you, and that's why I'm sometimes losing my pacing. At that times it's sometimes better like to give it a kick and go much faster, and just to insert it in there. That can save you, because every time you sort of stop, it's just you want to pause for a moment. But if you just keep going, just keep working at it, don't give up on it. Things take time, so just keep going. Okay, really feeling that groove develop now. And where I placed it over that white crystal part, I feel that it's not quite as deep there as the others, so that tends to be, so that's, again, quartz is a bit harder than the other materials. That makes it up, so that shouldn't be a surprise, but it will be helpful as a demonstration as we finish it. Just a pinch of abrasive at a time. Touch more water. Mix it up a bit and keep going. Counter at 23 minutes. Okay, smoko break for me. Damn, I lost a portion about 10 minutes. I'd come back to that and kept drilling a little bit more. The groove is definitely developed in there, and so I can now feel that that's wants to catch in there. It's locked in. However, as I showed at the start, on this side there was that white hard crystal that was there. That side is softer. So what's happened is that this side is grinding faster than what is this one, and it's going to want to drill at an angle. I'm going to keep going for a moment, but I'm going to be correcting it and trying to bring it back and make it as vertical as possible. So again, once that's in there, and once that groove is gone, you can really go to town and start working faster on it. And because that groove, it's stopping the side to side motion and slipping and wasted energy, so you can keep going further. Now I'm going to add a touch more fresh, and so so if I was to keep going, just following the groove as it is now, it's going to want to put me at an angle that I will be correcting that over time, as that's why I chose this spot, because I wanted that white crystal. Firstly, so we could see how it's cut and the look, compare the grooves to there as well, and just the nature of things again, just to show that the taper will always appear, just like in core 7, and if you're not achieving it, then you're not using this off-center handle drill, which Chris Dunn claims to have used. So repeated experiments, if they yield the same results, you've got yourself a theory, and if the results differ according to everyone else's, then you conducted the experiment wrong or you falsified your results. Okay, also I might be mentioning, now this was a drill that I used in the previous experiment, and the bottom of this drill was factory cut, so at a right angle. Now it did over time develop a tilt, an angle to it, because of the bias in the way that I was drilling. Wasn't, again, to keep it perfectly vertical using without a guide is just impossible. The laws of physics using off-center handle, if your wheel is not going to be perfectly balanced. But now it sort of seems to be correcting itself as well, probably because, again, with improved technique, I was able to keep it straighter and straighter, and I'll be again trying to use that. So the groove, because that side is easier to work as opposed to that white crystal chunk which is on this side, and we can correct it. So again, with experience, time, patience, what's impossible is actually quite possible, and although it does not compare with modern equipment, it's not some impossible, unimaginable amount of time that it couldn't possibly be done, therefore lost high technology. Not a single experiment by these people. They make a lot of claims, not a single experiment. They can never demonstrate anything they say. It's just, I could say Smurfs. If I don't show any example of Smurfs, then it's not worth anything. What can be claimed without evidence can be dismissed without evidence. Get more if there's any of that fresh abrasive on the inside, get it towards the outside. Try not to overload with the abrasive, and try not to, because the drill as it's going down, well, the abrasive is going to contact the side of the tube, and it's also going to want to drill outways as well. That's why you want to keep, so even though the groove is in there, it's only a shallow one, I'm going to keep this going until the groove is quite deep, because that's going to stop the drill moving sideways and drilling sideways and creating an ellipse. I want to create a tube that goes straight down. And just out of curiosity, I just want to feel with the, just to feel how deep it is. So again, you could use a matchstick or something. Feel for the deeper point and get an idea. Okay, it's a good few mils down at least now, and once that's developed a little bit more deeper, then again you can get much more aggressive. So once you've got your groove in there, that'll be a guide to keep it going down later. And then, yeah, starting off is slow, it's a little bit more tricky. Once you get going, you can really hit hard. Trying to keep it in that channel, so again, because it's sort of sliding around a bit, that's wasted time. So the more we can use that channel and keep it, again, maximum efficiency. if I want to be maximum efficiency, I'd use what was known to the Egyptians, that would be corundite. Again, I'm just using sandstone, again, just to prove a point. You don't need diamond technology. I don't know if you can see, but I can feel it. But so instead of that drill sliding, moving side to side, now that that groove is developed, it's right on target. And you can sort of hear the difference in the sound as well. So instead of that, yeah, it's just with time and experimentation experience. So you can imagine, you know, we've got generations and generations learning, passing on this knowledge, years of practice, you know, developing, seeing it from when they're a child going up and doing it, how much better they would be. Just a pinch at a time. Find the groove. Just push any of the fresh abrasive away from the centre, just to get it into that groove. And then you can sort of hear it being crunched underneath the copper. The copper does not cut, the sand cuts. If I was to have a steel tube, I would have zero advantage. The sand does the cutting, not the copper. Copper is softer than granite. Granite is harder than steel, so it's the abrasive, not the steel, not the copper. If I was to get a piece of sandpaper, same effect. It's not the paper that cuts, it's the sand. 4 a.m. Made a good start. I'll continue with this tomorrow, and yeah, you know, just keep working at it. These things don't happen instantly, and you know, good coffee takes time. Instant coffee tastes like crap. So all the good things take time, and we'll continue with that in the morning. So I've just temporarily taken away the guide, and we can see that, well, even just using the sandstone mix, and because the guide hole was a little bit sort of too large, you see where it slipped around, so there was sort of 2 holes beginning, but now I have the main groove and I can use that and work from that to go down. I'm pretty sure that's a piece of like quartz, that white chunk there, and so now it's just a matter of continuing on. So now that I've established you can use the sandstone mix, I will be going back to the crushed quartz and corundum block and the emery mix in there as well. So again, just to cut down, but with the groove, just a matter of keep on working now, and let's go. Okay, so there's the grey granite core. I chose to do that on that section where we've got that white, I suppose it's a piece of quartz. This is going to be tapered. If you use, whether you use a bow drill or this particular type of drill I'm using now, there's going to be some sideways grinding as well. It's always going to be thicker, the groove, than the actual tube itself. That's just the nature of the beast. There are ways to get around the tapering effect, but if you use a bow drill or this one, there is no way to get around it. You have to use a frame to keep it in place. If you don't use one, it's going to wobble and it will create that tapered effect, and depending on your technique, it's going to become more elliptical. So there are ways. So you do a little bit of drilling, you move 45 degrees, do some drilling, move around. That way you can keep the core very, very circular. But just a report now, it's deep enough. So progress report on the core. Now, I need this piece of pipe to demonstrate, because it's the same copper tube that I've been using, and notice that it rotates around. So whether you're using a bow drill or whether you're using the drill that I'm using now, it will always wobble and rotate around in there. That's just that cannot be escaped if you're using a hand operated tool such as that, and it will the profile of the tube will always, because the tube is grinding on the sides as well as grinding down. So anyone who claims that they can get firstly a straight core, or that they can slide it straight in there by using a bow drill or a hand operated off-center weighted drill, is just not telling the truth in regards to these things. This is, if you conduct these experiments, you'll find that the results will be repeated by yourself, and your results will be the same as mine, and my results are the same as, for instance, the Scientists Against Myth channel, and their results are the same as the Dennis Stock experiments. Everyone who conducts this experiment, with the exception of Lost High Technology, one experiment, everyone gets the same results, and yet that's just the nature of things. So that's just how things work, that's just how they are. And if you do, you know, these are cheap, easy experiments to do, much cheaper and much easier than, you know, going on a very overpriced tour to have people point at stones and say that's impossible, that can't be done, therefore lost ancient high technology. You just can't escape, you know, experimentation. You just can't escape it. And so, yeah, it really is a scam. Okay, I'm nearly about to break through on this particular core, but a few points. So um, what I think now is probably a better technique, at least if you're new to it, you want to have an attempt at it. Firstly, to avoid, so instead of wearing gloves, you could use now before I would have a rag sort of wrapped around like that, or a cloth piece of paper, anything, you know, that's, but I also note that a lighter weight is better because it gives you more control. Now, when you're spinning, it's always going to wobble, so instead of, I put the rag on, and basically what I'm saying is I have that, and then I pull down on this, so I can still spin, and this is going to give me protection against blisters, but I can apply a downward force. So sometimes I have my thumb on top, but now I think that this probably would be at least a good way to attempt it. But the important point is this handle is off center. It's always going to wobble. Even if the wheel is perfectly balanced, even if everything theoretically you could perfectly balance, and I'll come back because this is an important point regarding lost ancient high technology and core drilling and some of the shenanigans going on there. But so instead of having a heavier weight, which makes it harder, so it's harder to control because it's the laws of physics that's going to throw you around, and it's also a little bit sort of harder to get it spinning, so it's a little bit easier, a little bit more accurate, and you can now apply by pulling down, you can apply a downward force. So instead of having the heavier weight, you can adjust it as you want. But so I think this will be a technique worth looking into if you're going to have a go at it. And again, I'll spin it, but you'll see I'm pretty good at this now. Not professional long-term generation expert, but I can keep it very vertical, and I can keep spinning without losing the momentum. But no matter what you do, you're always going to get a wobble in this. Now, if I was to use a bow drill, I'd still get a wobble as well. Once you try to spin too fast to speed it up, then you're going to lose. So I think it's better to do it slower but more consistent, rather than really try and rush it and create that wobble, because that's going to affect the affect the core. But what you really want to do is to keep this as straight as possible, and you don't have to actually put really much. Once it gets spinning, you're really just guiding it around. You're not putting any strong force into the spin.
Okay, so just keep drilling and drilling. Depending on you, as a final result. Again, this was only the third experiment that I've done. Now I've done over 10, but I'm still far from being an expert. Getting the perfect balance between the speed. So a lighter weight gives you more control and higher RPM, but heavier weight would also increase the drilling speed. So I don't know exactly what the perfect balance between them is, but key thing is to have a really good fitting guide to begin with, but also to rotate your drill position. So again, I just rotated the stone. I sat in my chair, and every 5 minutes I just rotated the stone, rotated the stone. But if you're drilling on a big block, that's, you just move your position, 45 degrees, 30 degrees, whatever, you know, just to cancel out the bias that's inherent in the drill. It's a bit like when you're pedaling a bike. There's that when you're pushing down, you're putting more force into the pedal as opposed to where the pedal is at the top or the bottom. That's the same thing with the drill. There are a couple places where there is more energy being put into the drill, and that's why the taper on the left hand side, you can see where it's sort of straight on one side but tapered on the other. That was a noobish mistake. Just by not rotating the drill, there we see a later core taper is even, and as we showed at the beginning, when you look from the top, one is more elliptical, as where the later core, just by rotating the drill, cancelling out the bias, creates a circular top. So copper, modern copper of 99.9% is no advantage. Ancient Egyptian coppers, which were alloys of arsenic, bismuth and other metals in there, was a superior metal. And for this type of, so whether it was for chisels or for saws or for drills, ancient Egyptian copper was better than the modern stuff that you'll get from the hardware shop. And sand, just plain old sand. So whether it's, I could have easily just as used granite dust, because it's what gives granite its Mohs rating of 7 is the quartz. What gives sandstone its Mohs rating of 7 is the quartz. And so it's the quartz in granite that will cut just as effectively as with sand. The rule is like cuts like. You do not need a harder mineral to cut that mineral. Just like I can get two pieces of granite and rub them against one another, they're going to start shaving bits off. Same with sandstone. You rub them against one another, it's going to bring those pieces off. So you absolutely do not need silicon carbide, tungsten carbide, diamond, or even corundum to drill in granite. You need either sand or granite dust or just crushed quartz. So there you go. That's you asked for it. There it is. That's how you do it. You just got to follow through. It's boring, but there you go. It's just a fact. So cheers.